A dying man lay in a sterile hospital room, his only companion a German shepherd named Titan. The hospital said the dog had to go. They didn't know the veteran would uncover their darkest secret, or that his loyal partner would help expose a conspiracy that turned healing into murder. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. Ashford. Montana wore winter like a funeral shroud. The November sky pressed low over the town, heavy with clouds that promised snow, but delivered only cold rain that turned streets into mirrors of gray. The mountains surrounding the valley stood as silent witnesses, their peaks disappearing into mist that seemed less like weather and more like the town itself trying to hide. St. Augustine Memorial Hospital rose 4 stories above the modest downtown, its modern glass facade and pristine white exterior incongruous among the worn brick buildings that housed family businesses struggling to survive. The hospital thrived while the town withered, a fact that went unquestioned by most residents who saw the medical center as their community's crown jewel rather than the predator it had become. On the 3rd floor, in room 304, Marcus Reeves sat in the mechanical bed with his back straight despite the pain that lived in his bones like broken glass. At 68 years old and 6 feet 1 inch tall, he had been a formidable man once. Cancer had stolen 40 pounds from his frame, but it hadn't touched the steel in his gray eyes or the military bearing that made even sitting in a hospital gown look like a position of strength. His hands, scarred from decades of service, rested on the bed rails. He didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't show the fear that lived quietly in the space between his heartbeats. Navy SEALs learned early that stillness was a weapon, that patience could be as deadly as any blade. 20 years retired, and the training remained carved into his muscle memory deeper than any surgeon's knife could reach. Beside the bed, refusing to leave despite 3 separate orders from hospital administration, Titan lay with his massive head on his paws. 95 pounds of German shepherd, 9 years old, with a coat like midnight and amber eyes that missed nothing. The dog's ears swiveled constantly, tracking footsteps in the hallway, monitoring the rhythm of Marcus's breathing, alert to threats that hospital staff couldn't see and wouldn't believe. Titan was not a pet. He was a partner, a weapon with fur and loyalty coded into his DNA. A military working dog who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with Marcus's son, before an IED took the young SEAL's life 2 years ago. The dog had transferred that fierce devotion to Marcus, becoming his service animal, his early warning system for the seizures that sometimes accompanied his cancer treatment, his anchor to a world that increasingly felt like it was slipping away. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else, something Marcus's trained senses recognized but couldn't quite name. It wasn't the clean chemical scent of proper medical care. It was the smell of fear buried under false efficiency, of secrets hidden behind clipboard smiles and reassuring voices that rang hollow. Through the window, rain streaked the glass like tears the sky was too tired to hold back. Marcus watched the gray afternoon fade toward evening, marking time by the changing shifts of nurses, the medication schedules that arrived with mechanical precision, the meals that tasted like cardboard and good intentions. This was supposed to be palliative care. Comfort for the dying, a place to find peace in the final chapter. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the doctors had said. 3 to 6 months if he was lucky, though Marcus had never been clear on what constituted luck when death was the only guaranteed outcome. He'd survived combat in Vietnam at 19, led missions in the Gulf War, trained 2 generations of SEALs in the art of staying alive when the world was trying to kill you. Cancer didn't care about his service record. He'd checked himself into St. Augustine Memorial a week ago when the pain became too much to manage alone in his cabin, 15 miles outside town. The hospital had a reputation for excellent end-of-life care, for treating terminal patients with dignity and compassion. The brochures showed peaceful rooms, attentive staff, a philosophy of helping patients live their final days with comfort and grace. The reality felt different in ways Marcus couldn't articulate, but his instincts screamed about. Titan's low growl pulled Marcus from his thoughts. The dog's body went rigid, ears forward, attention locked on the closed door. Someone was coming, someone who made the animal's hackles rise in warning. Marcus's hand dropped to Titan's head, fingers finding the familiar comfort of warm fur and solid muscle. The dog quieted, but didn't relax, tension thrumming through his frame like a wire pulled too tight. The door opened without a knock. A man entered wearing security guard blues that stretched tight across his shoulders and chest. 6'3", 240, shaved head gleaming under fluorescent lights, neck tattoos barely visible above his collar. His name tag read Voss, and his eyes held the flat affect of someone who enjoyed his authority too much. Behind him came a woman in a white coat, clipboard clutched like a shield. Dr. Helena Reeves, no relation, the nameplate said. 50-ish, tired eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles she was losing. Mr. Reeves, Voss said, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a man used to being obeyed. We've discussed this. Hospital policy clearly states no animals in patient rooms. The dog needs to go. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He'd learned long ago that silence made people uncomfortable, that letting them fill the quiet often revealed more than questions ever could. Voss's smile tightened. Sir, I understand you're attached to the animal, but we have regulations, health codes, other patients with allergies. You need to make arrangements for someone to take him, or we'll have to call animal control. He's a service dog, Marcus said, his voice low and even, each word deliberate. Federal law protects his right to stay with me. Americans with Disabilities Act. You remove him, you violate federal statute. The security chief's jaw clenched. His hand moved to the radio on his belt. An unconscious gesture of power. We're willing to make accommodations. A kennel facility nearby can board him. You can have visiting hours. No. The word hung in the air like a blade. Simple, final, absolute. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her voice softer, trying diplomacy where intimidation failed. Mr. Reeves, Marcus, please, we're trying to help you. The dog is clearly stressed being in a hospital environment. Wouldn't he be more comfortable somewhere designed for animals? Marcus's eyes moved to her, and she took an involuntary step back from whatever she saw there. Titan stays with me. He's trained for medical alert. He detects my seizures before they happen. Removing him puts my life at risk. You want that liability? Voss leaned forward, dropping the pretense of courtesy. Listen, old man, I don't care about your dog or your laws or your tough guy routine. This is private property. You're a guest here. Guests follow rules or they leave. Simple as that. Titan's growl returned, deeper, a sound that vibrated through the floor. The dog rose to his feet, 95 pounds of controlled violence. Amber eyes locked on Voss with the same focus he'd used tracking insurgents through Afghan villages. Sit, Marcus said quietly. Titan obeyed instantly, but didn't break his stare. The security chief's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing the canister of pepper spray holstered there. Marcus saw the movement, cataloged it, calculated response times and tactical advantages with the automatic assessment of a man who'd spent 40 years making split-second decisions about violence. There a problem here? A new voice from the doorway, female, young, uncertain. A nurse stood at the threshold, late 20s, Asian features, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her scrubs were rumpled from a long shift, and her eyes moved between Voss and Marcus with the wariness of someone who'd learned that hospital politics could be as dangerous as any disease. Her name tag read Sarah Chen, RN. No problem, Voss said, his tone shifting. Just explaining policy to Mr. Reeves. Sarah's eyes dropped to Titan, and something in her expression softened. Is he causing trouble, the dog? No trouble, Marcus replied. He's trained, quiet, clean, doesn't bother other patients. She nodded slowly, then looked at Dr. Reeves. Dr. Hargrove wants you in his office, said it was urgent. The older woman's face tightened. Now? He said immediately. Dr. Reeves turned back to Marcus, her professional mask slipping enough to show genuine concern underneath. We'll continue this conversation later. Please think about what's best for everyone involved. She left quickly, her white coat disappearing down the hallway. Voss lingered, his eyes moving from Marcus to Titan and back. You've got 24 hours to make arrangements. After that, the dog goes. One way or another. He left the threat hanging in the air as he walked out, closing his door with deliberate force. Sarah remained, her hand still on the doorframe. She looked at Marcus, then at Titan, then back at Marcus. Is beautiful, your dog. He's a soldier, Marcus said quietly. Same as me. What's his name? Titan. She smiled, a brief flash of warmth in the clinical cold. Strong name. She hesitated, then added, I saw your chart. Thank you for your service. Marcus nodded, the automatic response to words he'd heard 1,000 times. Words that meant everything and nothing, depending on who spoke them. Sarah moved to check his IV, her movements efficient but gentle. As she worked, she spoke quietly. Between you and me, keep him close. Don't let them separate you. Something in her tone made Marcus focus completely. Why? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she glanced at the closed door, then back at him. Just trust me. Whatever you do, don't let that dog out of your sight. Before Marcus could press further, she finished her check and left, moving quickly down the hall. Marcus sat in the gathering darkness, Titan pressed against the bed. Both of them alert to dangers neither could yet see, but both sensed approaching like a storm. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the hospital hummed with its machinery of healing and hidden horrors. And somewhere in the building, decisions were being made about who deserved to live and who was simply inventory waiting to be processed. The night shift brought silence that felt less peaceful and more predatory. Marcus lay awake in the darkness, listening to sounds that didn't belong, footsteps that paused too long outside certain rooms, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when other staff approached. The mechanical hum of equipment that should have been comforting, but instead felt like the hospital itself was breathing, waiting, watching. Titan hadn't settled. The dog maintained position beside the bed, head up, ears rotating like radar dishes tracking movement through walls. At 3 a.m, he released a low whine that Marcus recognized as distress, not for himself, but for something else, someone else nearby. The room next door, 306. Marcus had heard the occupant coughing through the thin walls, heard nurses checking on him more frequently than they checked on Marcus. An older man's voice, raspy but kind, thanking the staff even as pain colored every word. There was only silence from that room. Heavy. Complete. Wrong. Marcus eased himself out of bed, ignoring the pain that flared through his abdomen like hot wire. He'd operated through worse. Titan stood immediately, pressing against his leg, offering support and solidarity. Moving to the door, Marcus opened it carefully, checking the hallway. Empty. The nurse's station at the corridor's end sat abandoned, computer screens glowing, but no staff visible. 3 a.m. should have been the quietest hour, but something felt orchestrated about this particular emptiness. The door to room 306 stood slightly ajar. No light escaped from inside. Marcus moved closer, Titan matching his pace, both of them employing the silent movement that came from training and trust. Through the gap, Marcus could see into the darkened room. The bed was empty, not just unoccupied but stripped, fresh linens folded at the foot, mattress bare, as if no one had ever been there. As if the coughing man Marcus had heard just hours ago had never existed. Can I help you? The voice came from behind, sharp with false courtesy. Marcus turned to find Sarah Chen emerging from a supply room, her arms full of blankets. But her eyes told a different story than her neutral tone. They were wide, frightened, and when they dropped to the empty room behind him, something like resignation crossed her face. The man in 306, Marcus said quietly. Where is he? Transferred. The word came too quickly, rehearsed. To a different facility, better equipped for his needs. At 3 a.m. His condition deteriorated. They had to move fast. She clutched the blankets tighter, knuckles white. You should get back to bed, Mr. Reeves. You need rest. Marcus studied her face, reading the micro-expressions that most people didn't know they were broadcasting. Fear. Guilt. A desperate plea in her eyes that contradicted every word leaving her mouth. What's his name? The patient who was transferred. I can't discuss other patients. Privacy laws. His name, Marcus repeated, his voice dropping to the command tone that had sent men into combat and brought them home again. Sarah glanced down the hallway, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Robert Lawson, Bobby, 52, former firefighter, terminal liver cancer. His wife died 6 months ago. No other family. She paused, and her next words came out broken. He was kind, always thanked us. Even when the pain was bad, he said please and thank you. The past tense hung between them like an accusation. Where did they really take him? Marcus asked. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. I have a daughter, 7 years old, Emma. She's everything to me. The non-answer was answer enough. Before Marcus could press further, footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Heavy boots, multiple people. Sarah's face went pale. Get back in your room, now, please. Marcus returned to 304, Titan shadowing him. He left the door cracked slightly, enough to see without being obvious. Sarah had moved to the nurse's station, busying herself with paperwork that didn't need doing, her hands shaking. Voss emerged from the stairwell, accompanied by 2 orderlies Marcus hadn't seen before. Large men, their scrubs stretched across bodies built for violence, rather than healing. They moved past Sarah without acknowledging her, entered room 306, and emerged minutes later, wheeling a gurney covered completely by a white sheet. The form underneath was clearly human-shaped, clearly still, clearly beyond any help medicine could provide. They moved toward the service elevator, their footsteps synchronized, efficient, practiced. This wasn't the first time they'd performed this particular task. Sarah kept her eyes on her paperwork, but Marcus saw her shoulders shaking, saw her wipe her face quickly when she thought no one was watching, saw her glance toward his room with an expression that mixed warning and desperate hope. Marcus eased his door closed and returned to bed. Titan jumped up without being invited, pressing his warm bulk against Marcus's side. The dog's heartbeat was steady, calm, an anchor in waters that had turned suddenly treacherous. Bobby Lawson had been alive at midnight. Marcus had heard him talking to a nurse, heard him laugh weakly at some joke. Now he was a shape under a sheet being wheeled to places patients weren't supposed to go. Transferred. The lie was insult added to whatever injury had occurred in that room. Marcus had seen death in every form it took. Combat, disease, accident, age. He knew what it looked like when someone died naturally versus when death received help arriving. The speed of Bobby's departure, the cleaned room, the frightened nurse who spoke in past tense, the security chief overseeing body removal instead of medical staff. Every detail screamed wrong. His phone sat on the bedside table. Charging. Marcus considered calling someone, but who? Local police? Voss had moved through the hospital with the confidence of someone who owned the space or was owned by whoever did. A complaint would go nowhere, except back to the people he was complaining about. He needed proof, evidence, something more substantial than instinct and suspicious timing. Titan's ears suddenly swiveled toward the door. A moment later, soft knocking. Marcus checked the time. 4:15 a.m. He called permission to enter. Sarah slipped inside, closing the door behind her with careful quiet. She'd been crying, her eyes red and swollen, but her jaw was set with determination that hadn't been there an hour ago. I need to show you something, she said without preamble. But if I do this, if anyone finds out, my daughter loses her mother. Do you understand? They'll kill me. Marcus sat up fully. Who will kill you? I don't know all their names. Voss, Dr. Hargrove, others. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I started documenting 3 months ago, after the 5th patient disappeared. Everyone kept saying transfers, better facilities, family requests. But I checked, made phone calls during my breaks. None of those patients arrived anywhere else. They just vanished. She opened a folder on her phone, turned the screen toward Marcus. Photos, dozens of them. Patient charts with highlighted discrepancies. Medication logs showing morphine dosages that didn't match protocol. Time-stamped images of empty rooms that had held patients hours before. Screenshots of text messages between staff members with vague references to cleanings and removals. Bobby Lawson makes 23, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength from finally speaking truth aloud. 23 terminal patients in 18 months, all listed as transfers, all disappeared, no forwarding facilities. No death certificates filed locally, nothing. Marcus scrolled through the images, his mind cataloging details, building patterns. Why haven't you gone to the police? Chief Mercer sits on the hospital board of directors, gets $50,000 a year in consulting fees. She laughed bitterly. For what consultation, nobody says. But every complaint about the hospital gets buried. Every investigation stops before it starts. FBI, Marcus said. Healthcare fraud falls under federal jurisdiction. I'm a single mother with student debt I'll never pay off. Who listens to me? She met his eyes. But you're different. You have rank, service record. People might believe a Navy SEAL. Marcus studied her face, seeing the desperate calculation there. She was gambling everything on a dying man and his dog because she'd run out of options and couldn't stay silent anymore. Why now? Why tell me? Because Bobby was different. He reminded me of my father. Same kindness, same dignity. Tears spilled over. And because they're coming for you next. I saw your chart update tonight. Dr. Hargrove flagged you for accelerated protocol. That's what they call it. Accelerated protocol. Like you're a process instead of a person. Titan pressed closer to Marcus, sensing the shift in the room's emotional temperature. What happens during accelerated protocol? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew. Morphine dosages increase. Sedation becomes constant. Then one night, the patient stops breathing. Natural progression of disease, the paperwork says. Family notified after cremation, which the patient supposedly requested in advance. Sarah's voice hardened. Except Bobby never signed cremation authorization. I saw his actual intake forms before they were altered. Marcus handed back her phone. You've risked a lot showing me this. I'm risking more keeping silent. She moved toward the door, paused. They'll try to separate you from your dog. Don't let them. Don't eat or drink anything unless staff opens it in front of you. Don't refuse your regular medications or they'll force sedation. And don't trust anyone except maybe Dr. Reeves. She's scared but not dirty. How do you know? Because they threatened to fire her last month when she questioned a patient death. She has 2 kids in college. She can't afford to lose this job. Sarah opened the door, checked the hallway. I work nights Tuesday through Saturday. Days, you're on your own. Be careful, Mr. Reeves. She left as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving Marcus alone with evidence of murder and a timeline that had suddenly become very personal. Outside, dawn began its slow arrival, turning the sky from black to gray. Titan watched the door with unwavering focus. Marcus made a decision that felt both inevitable and insane. He was dying anyway. Cancer would kill him in months. But he'd be damned if he'd let these people decide his timeline or victimize anyone else while he still had breath. Not his fight. Not his town. Not his problem. Except it was now. Because somewhere in this building, people were playing God with terminal patients. Because Bobby Lawson had died alone and afraid. Because Sarah Chen was risking everything, hoping someone would finally stand up. Because 23 people had vanished into whatever darkness this hospital concealed. Marcus picked up his phone and began making calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old teammates, former commanding officers, anyone with connections to federal agencies who investigated the kind of evil that wore white coats and carried clipboards. Titan's tail thumped once against the mattress. The dog knew. Somehow, he always knew when the fight was about to begin. Morning arrived with false cheerfulness. Breakfast trays, medication rounds, nurses with practiced smiles asking about pain levels and sleep quality. The hospital performed its theater of normalcy while Marcus sat in his bed, knowing what horrors moved beneath the surface, like sharks circling wounded prey. He'd made 4 calls before dawn. 3 went to voicemail. The 4th connected him to Agent Jennifer Torres, FBI Healthcare Fraud Division, Denver Field Office. She'd listened without interrupting while Marcus laid out everything Sarah had shown him, every suspicion his trained instincts screamed about. Her silence after he finished spoke volumes. How soon can you die? She'd asked finally, her bluntness surprising him. 3 to 6 months, probably closer to 3. They'll move faster than that if they flagged you. Can you last 48 hours? I need that long to get a team assembled, warrants prepared, evidence protocols established. I can last as long as necessary. Don't be a hero, Mr. Reeves. Dead witnesses don't testify. She'd paused. Keep your dog close. Animals sense things we miss, and document everything. Phone recordings, photos, write down every conversation. If something happens to you, I need a trail to follow. Now, 8 hours later, Marcus watched Dr. Hargrove enter his room with the smooth confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. 56 years old, fit despite his age, wearing a suit that cost more than most patients' monthly income. His smile was perfect, his handshake firm, his eyes cold as a mortuary slab. "Mr. Reeves, Marcus, good morning." He pulled up a chair without asking, settling in like they were old friends. "I wanted to check in personally, see how you're adjusting to our facility." Titan lifted his head from the floor, amber eyes tracking the doctor's every movement. A low rumble built in the dog's chest, barely audible but unmistakable. "Adjusting fine," Marcus replied, his voice neutral, giving nothing away. Hargrove's eyes flicked to Titan with poorly concealed distaste. "Yes, about that. I understand there's been some tension regarding your animal. I want you to know I'm on your side. Service dogs provide important therapeutic benefits." His tone suggested he believed no such thing. "However, we need to ensure proper protocols, vaccinations, health certificates, behavior assessments. All current. I can provide documentation." "Excellent, excellent." Hargrove pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. "Now, looking at your chart, I'm concerned we're not managing your pain adequately. You're barely using the morphine pump we've provided. Pain's manageable. Admirable stoicism, but unnecessary suffering serves no purpose." The doctor leaned forward, his expression shifting to practice sympathy. "Marcus, I've worked with hundreds. Dreads of terminal patients. Pride is natural, but there comes a time when comfort should take priority over toughness. Let us help you." Marcus recognized the setup, the caring physician routine designed to lower defenses, establish trust, make the patient compliant. He'd seen interrogators use similar techniques on captured insurgents: build rapport, express concern, then slide the knife in when the target relaxed. "I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I prefer staying alert." Something flickered behind Hargrove's professional mask. Irritation, calculation. "Alert for what? You're safe here. This is a healing space. Old habits. Military training doesn't fade." "Ah yes, Navy SEAL, correct?" Hargrove consulted his tablet. "Impressive record. Vietnam, Gulf War, Training Command. You've seen considerable action." "Some. And now you're fighting a different kind of battle. One where the enemy can't be defeated through strength or tactics." The doctor's voice dropped to a tone meant to sound compassionate, but landed somewhere closer to condescending. "There's courage in acceptance, Marcus, in letting go when the time comes." Titan's growl intensified. Marcus's hand dropped to the dog's head, a calming gesture that was also a clear signal he wasn't alone and wasn't defenseless. Hargrove noticed. His smile tightened. "Perhaps we should discuss sedation for the animal. He seems agitated. Stressful environment for a dog." "He's fine, trained for high-stress situations. Nevertheless, I'm going to recommend a veterinary consultation. For everyone's safety." Hargrove stood, smoothing his expensive suit. "I'll have the nurses increase your pain medication dosage. Non-negotiable, I'm afraid. Medical necessity. I'll refuse it. Then we'll have to consider whether you're competent to make your own medical decisions." The threat was delivered with the same pleasant tone he'd used discussing pain management. Patients who pose risks to themselves sometimes require protective intervention. The mask had slipped. The Caring Physician Act dissolved, revealing the calculating predator underneath. This was a man who viewed terminal patients as problems to be solved, inventory to be processed, obstacles to whatever agenda drove him. Marcus met his gaze with the flat calm that had stared down enemy combatants across 3 decades of warfare. "I'm competent. My decisions are my own, and my dog stays with me." For several seconds, the two men measured each other. Hargrove saw a dying veteran, weakened by disease, isolated and vulnerable. Marcus saw a predator who'd been successful so long he'd forgotten that some prey fought back. "We'll continue this conversation later," Hargrove said finally. "When you're thinking more clearly." He left. His footsteps receding down the hallway with the measured pace of someone who believed time was on his side. Marcus waited 30 seconds, then picked up his phone and texted Agent Torres. Hargrove made contact. Threatened forced sedation and competency evaluation. Timeline accelerating. Her response came within minutes. "Stall. Need 36 more hours. Help is coming." 36 hours, a day and a half. Marcus had survived longer odds in worse conditions, but never while poisoned from the inside by disease. Never in a hospital that had become a hunting ground. A knock on the door. Sarah entered carrying lunch, her movements efficient, but her eyes darting nervously. She set the tray down, checked his IV with hands that trembled slightly. "Everything ordered comes pre-packaged," she whispered while adjusting his pillows. "They haven't had time to tamper, but dinner service switches to kitchen prep. Don't eat it." Noted. She pulled out her phone, shielded the screen from the door with her body, showed him a new photo. Bobby Lawson's patient chart with a section highlighted. "I accessed records last night. Bobby's final morphine dose was 50 times standard protocol, enough to stop his heart in minutes." Marcus memorized the details. "How'd you get access?" "Dr. Reeves' login. She doesn't know I have it." Sarah's voice barely audible. "There's more. Financial records, offshore accounts receiving regular deposits, payments corresponding to patient deaths. Can you get copies?" "Already done. Stored on a cloud drive they can't access." She finished her check, spoke in normal volume for anyone who might be listening. "Your vitals look good, Mr. Reeves. Call if you need anything." As she reached the door, Titan suddenly lunged to his feet, facing the hallway with every muscle rigid. His ears pinned back, teeth bared in a snarl that Marcus had only heard in combat situations when the dog detected immediate threats. Sarah froze. Marcus rolled out of bed despite the pain, putting himself between Titan and whatever approached. Voss appeared in the doorway, flanked by the two large orderlies from the previous night. His smile was predatory, triumphant. "Mr. Reeves, we've received multiple complaints about your animal's aggressive behavior. For everyone's safety, he needs to be removed from the premises immediately. He hasn't shown aggression toward anyone. I have 3 witnesses who say different." Voss gestured to his companions. "We're authorized to remove the animal by force if necessary. You can cooperate, or we can involve police." Marcus's hand found Titan's collar. The dog vibrated with controlled violence, waiting for the command to attack, held back only by years of training and absolute trust in his handler. "Federal law protects service animals in medical facilities," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not when they pose safety risks." Voss pulled out a printed document, held it up like a weapon. "This is a court order, authorizing removal of a dangerous animal from hospital property. Signed by Judge Morrison this morning. You want to argue? Take it up with him." The judge's signature looked legitimate. The legal language read official, but the speed of acquisition, the convenient timing, the smugness on Voss's face, all screamed corruption and pre-planned execution. Sarah stepped forward, her fear momentarily overcome by outrage. "This is illegal. You can't just take someone's service dog." "Stay out of this, Chen, unless you want to join the animal in." In the pound, Voss's attention returned to Marcus. "Last chance. Hand over the leash, or we take him by force." Marcus calculated odds. 3 large men, 1 elderly security guard visible down the hall, unknown number of accomplices in easy calling distance. He was weak from cancer, attached to an IV, wearing a hospital gown. Titan could take down 2, maybe all 3, but would be hurt or killed in the process. And then what? Arrested for assault? Forcibly sedated? Exactly what they wanted. Agent Torres needed 36 hours. Fighting now meant losing everything. His hand tightened on Titan's collar. The dog whined, sensing the decision, hating it, but trusting it. "Guard," Marcus commanded softly. "With me." Titan's body language shifted fractionally. Still alert, still protective, but no longer poised to attack. Marcus met Voss's eyes with a gaze that had sent younger, stronger men running. "You touch my dog, you'll regret it." "That a threat?" "A promise." Moss laughed, a sound without humor. "Old man, you're dying. What are you gonna do? Bleed on me?" Marcus smiled then, immensely cold enough to make the security chief's confidence falter. "I've pilled men in better shape than you are. Disease doesn't change training. Weakness doesn't erase 40 years of knowing exactly how to break a human body." The room temperature seemed to drop. The orderlies shifted uncomfortably. Even Voss's bravado cracked slightly around the edges. "Titan stays with me," Marcus continued in that same lethal calm. "You try to remove him, I'll file federal complaints, contact every veterans organization in the country, make such legal and public relations hell for this hospital that your bosses will fire you to make it stop. Or you can walk away. Choose. Silence stretched. Marcus's hand moved to his radio, hesitated, dropped. The mathematics of power had shifted. Whatever orders he'd received weren't worth the exposure that fighting a decorated veteran would bring. 24 hours, Voss said finally. Then the dog goes. No more extensions. He left, his orderlies following, their footsteps heavy with frustrated aggression. Sarah released a breath she'd been holding. That bought you time. Not much. Enough. Marcus returned to bed, exhaustion hitting hard now that adrenaline faded. Get me everything you have. Financial records, patient files, communications, all of it. Upload to a secure server. Already done. Sent the access codes to your email. Marcus checked his phone. New message from an encrypted address. Opened it to find Sarah's compiled evidence. Months of documentation, dozens of suspicious deaths, payment records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to offshore accounts. Text messages between Hargrove and unknown parties discussing protocols and quotas and inventory. Not just murder. Systematic, organized, profit-driven harvesting of human beings who had the misfortune to be both terminal and friendless. Why Bobby? Marcus asked quietly. What made them choose him? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. No family, modest estate, nobody to ask questions or demand investigations. The perfect victim. She wiped her face, like you would be if you didn't have contacts and training and a dog they're afraid of. How many others like Bobby, alone, forgotten? All 23 fit the profile. Isolated terminal patients with no advocates. Her voice hardened with anger. They're targeting the most vulnerable people in the world, and nobody's stopping them. Marcus looked at Titan, then at Sarah, then at the phone containing evidence of horrors that would send multiple people to prison for life. We're stopping them, now. How? You're outnumbered, outgunned, dying. Doesn't matter. This ends. They pick the wrong person to terrorize. Marcus spent the afternoon transforming his hospital room into a defensive position. Years of combat experience didn't disappear because the battlefield had changed from desert compounds to sterile corridors. He mapped sightlines through the door's window, identified blind spots, calculated response times from the nurse's station to his room. Titan patrolled the perimeter, his presence a deterrent and early warning system combined. The IV stand became a potential weapon. The bedside table could block the door. The plastic water pitcher held liquid that could temporarily blind an attacker. Every object received tactical assessment. Every sound in the hallway got cataloged and analyzed. Marcus's body was failing him, but his mind remained sharp as the day he graduated SEAL training 48 years ago. His phone buzzed. Agent Torres. Team assembling. Warrants being drafted. Need you to stay visible and alive. They won't move against you if they think you're being watched. Marcus typed back. Already threatened. Timelines compressed. They'll try tonight. Hold position. We're scrambling resources. Federal marshals en route as witness protection. ETA 8 hours. 8 hours. The sun would set in 3. Darkness brought opportunities for the predators running this facility. Night shifts had fewer staff, fewer witnesses, more shadows to hide bodies and erase evidence. Sarah returned at shift change, her movements hurried, stress evident in every gesture. She carried sealed packages of crackers and juice. Dinner service started. Don't touch anything from the kitchen. This is from the vending machine, unopened. Appreciated. She checked the hallway, closed the door most of the way, spoke rapidly in hushed tones. Dr. Reeds pulled me aside, said Hargrove's planning something. She doesn't know what, but there's a meeting tonight after visiting hours end. Admin staff only. She wasn't invited, which means it's about something they don't want ethical doctors knowing about. Marcus absorbed this. Where's the meeting? 4th floor, executive conference room, 9 p.m. Sarah hesitated. There's more. I accessed security footage from last night. Bobby's room. Watched what really happened. Her face had gone pale, hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. You need to see this. The video was time-stamped 2:47 a.m. Bobby Lawson's room. Camera angle from the corner, giving full view of the bed. Bobby lay sleeping. Morphine drip connected. Monitors beeping steadily. Then the door opened. Voss entered, followed by a figure in surgical scrubs and mask. Not a doctor. Wrong body language, wrong movement patterns. The masked figure approached Bobby's IV, injected something into the line. On screen, Bobby's monitors immediately showed distress, heart rate spiking, then plummeting. The old firefighter's eyes opened, confusion turning to terror as his body convulsed. He tried to reach for the call button. Voss casually moved it out of reach. 47 seconds. That's how long it took Bobby Lawson to die, while two men watched without attempting resuscitation. When the monitors flatlined, the masked figure calmly disconnected the IV, removed all evidence of the injection, and reset the equipment. Voss made a phone call. Minutes later, the orderlies arrived with their gurney. The entire murder, cleanup, and body removal took 11 minutes. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. He'd seen death in combat, watched friends die despite desperate attempts to save them. But this was different. This was cold-blooded execution of a helpless man whose only crime was being sick and alone. "I made copies," Saya whispered. "Uploaded to 3 separate secure servers. They can't erase this." Who was the person in scrubs? Can't tell from the footage, but there's only 5 people with access to medications concentrated enough to cause that kind of reaction. She pulled up a list on her phone. Hargrove, 2 attending physicians, the head pharmacist, and the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist would know exactly what drug combination would mimic natural death, Marcus said quietly. Dr. Raymond Chen, no relation to me, despite the surname. 51 years old, been with the hospital 8 years. Sarah's voice hardened. He drives a Tesla and owns a vacation home in Cabo. On an anesthesiologist's salary at a small Montana hospital. The pieces assembled themselves. Hargrove ran the operation. Voss provided muscle and security. Chen supplied the medical expertise to kill without obvious evidence. How many others were involved? How deep did the corruption run? What about the organs? Marcus asked. You mentioned trafficking. Sarah nodded grimly. I've been tracking that too. Every patient who disappeared had viable organs despite their terminal diagnosis. Kidneys, liver, corneas, heart valves. Even terminal cancer doesn't destroy everything immediately. She showed him another document. There's a private surgical suite in the basement, officially listed as storage, but the electrical usage suggests active medical equipment. And I've seen refrigerated trucks making pickups twice a week from the loading dock. Medical supply company, according to the paperwork, but the license plates trace to a shell corporation. Harvesting organs and selling them black market. Marcus said, how much profit per patient? Depends on the organs. Conservatively, 200,000, maybe more for premium tissue from younger victims. The mathematics of evil. 23 patients at 200,000 each meant over $4 million. Enough to pay off gambling debts, buy vacation homes, fund the lifestyle that the perpetrators believed their positions entitled them to. And all it cost was the lives of people society had already written off as dying anyway. Titan suddenly stood, body rigid, facing the door. His ears swiveled forward, a low growl building in his chest. Someone was coming. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Sarah pocketed her phone. I need to go. They can't see me here too long. She moved to the door, paused. Whatever happens tonight, know that you gave Bobby justice. You gave all of them justice. It's not finished yet. I know. That's what scares me. She left quickly, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Marcus waited. Titan's growl intensified. The dog positioned himself between the bed and the door, every muscle coiled for action. The door opened. Dr. Hargrove entered, accompanied by a man Marcus hadn't seen before. Asian features, expensive watch, the confidence of someone used to holding life and death in his hands. Dr. Raymond Chen, almost certainly. Behind them, Voss filled the doorway like a malevolent shadow. Marcus, Hargrove said with false warmth, I'd like you to meet Dr. Chen, our head of anesthesiology. We've been discussing your case. Chen nodded politely, his eyes cataloging Marcus with the detached assessment of someone viewing inventory rather than a patient. Mr. Reeves, your pain management has been inadequate. We'd like to start a more aggressive protocol. I'm managing fine. Your chart suggests otherwise, Hargrove interjected smoothly. Elevated heart rate, irregular sleep patterns, refusing medications. These indicate suffering we can alleviate. I'll decide what I need. Chen stepped closer, his voice taking on a tone of professional authority. Mr. Reeves, I've worked with hundreds of terminal patients. There's a point where pride becomes cruelty to oneself. You've reached that point. We're recommending immediate sedation, followed by a continuous morphine protocol that will ensure your remaining time is peaceful. Titan's snarl became audible, the dog's lips pulled back from impressive teeth, his entire body broadcasting lethal intent. Your animal is distressed, Chen observed calmly. Another reason for sedation. You're upsetting him by resisting necessary care. Marcus met the doctor's eyes and saw the calculation there. Saw a man who'd convinced himself that killing terminal patients was mercy, that harvesting their organs was practical recycling, that profit extracted from the dying was simply smart business. Chen had rationalized himself into monstrosity, one justification at a time, until the line between healing and murder had disappeared entirely. How many? Marcus asked quietly. Chen's expression didn't change. How many what? Patients you've euthanized. Given that final push when you decided they'd lived long enough. Silence crystallized in the room. Hargrove's face went carefully blank. Voss's hand moved to his radio. Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. I don't know what you're implying, Chen said finally. But these accusations are concerning. They suggest paranoia, possibly medication-induced psychosis. Dr. Hargrove, I recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation. Agreed, Hargrove said quickly. We'll need to sedate him for his own protection and the safety of staff. Chen pulled a pre-filled syringe from his pocket. The movement was too smooth, too practiced, too ready. They'd come prepared to force the issue regardless of Marcus's cooperation. Marcus swung his legs off the bed, standing despite the pain that shot through his abdomen. You inject me with that, it's assault. I'll press charges. You'll be sedated and unable to press anything, Voss said, moving into the room. This is for your own good, old man. Stop fighting. Titan, Marcus said quietly. Guard. The dog positioned himself directly in front of Marcus. 95 pounds of trained aggression focused on the three men. His snarl filled the room with a sound that raised primal fears buried deep in human DNA. Chen stopped advancing. Voss pulled a can of pepper spray from his belt. Call off your dog or I'll put him down permanent. You spray that dog, you'll answer for it, Marcus said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who'd made harder promises and kept them all. Federal law, state law, military regulations. I know them better than you do. And I've got lawyers who'd love this case. You're dying, Hargrove said, dropping the pretense of concern. You'll be dead in months. What does it matter if you go peacefully now versus suffering for weeks? We're offering mercy. Mercy I didn't ask for, from people who profit from deaths they cause. Marcus pulled out his phone. I've documented everything. Patient records, financial statements, video footage of Bobby Lawson's murder. It's already uploaded to federal servers. You touch me, you accelerate an investigation that's already in motion. The bluff was partially true. The evidence existed, Agent Torres had copies. But the investigation wasn't far enough along to protect him if they decided the risk was worth eliminating the witness. Chen and Hargrove exchanged glances. Some wordless communication passed between them. Chen pocketed the syringe. This conversation isn't over. We'll be back with proper authorization. Bring whoever you want. Marcus replied. Bring lawyers, judges, police chiefs. Bring everyone you've bought and paid for. Won't change what's coming. They left, Voss lingering in the doorway with a look promising violence deferred, not cancelled. When they were gone, Marcus sat heavily on the bed. His hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Titan pressed against his legs, offering solid warmth and silent support. His phone buzzed. Agent Torres. Local PD just got anonymous tip about disturbance at the hospital. Their stalling response, someone's trying to isolate you. Marshals are 3 hours out. Can you hold? Marcus looked at Titan, at the door, at the window showing darkness falling over Ashford like a burial shroud. 3 hours, long enough for a lot of things to happen. Long enough for desperate men to make desperate moves. He typed back, we'll hold whatever it takes. Outside his window, lights began appearing in the parking lot. More vehicles than usual for evening shift change. People gathering, plans being finalized. The predators were coordinating their attack. Marcus checked his phone's battery. 73%. Enough. He started recording video, propped the phone on the windowsill with a clear view of the room and door. If they came for him, there would be evidence. If they killed him, there would be witnesses, even if those witnesses were digital. Titan settled beside the bed, watchful and ready. The dog knew what combat smelled like, what pre-battle tension felt like. He'd been here before in Afghan villages and Iraqi compounds. Different country, different enemy, same fundamental truth. Bad men were planning violence, and good men had to be ready to meet it. Marcus's hand found Titan's head, scratched behind the ears in the spot that always made the dog's eyes close with contentment. Just like old times, huh boy? You and me against the world. Titan's tail thumped once against the floor. Agreement, acceptance, readiness. Let them come, Marcus whispered to the gathering darkness. We'll be waiting. The attack came at 10:30 p.m., during the shift change chaos, when corridors filled with staff swapping updates and responsibilities. Marcus heard them coming before Titan alerted. 4 sets of footsteps, moving with coordinated purpose that spoke of planning and rehearsal. He'd spent the intervening hours preparing. The IV stand disconnected and positioned as a staff weapon. Chair wedged under the door handle. Phone still recording from the windowsill, its camera lens capturing everything. Marcus stood beside the bed, wearing the clothes Sarah had smuggled in during dinner. No longer vulnerable in a hospital gown, but dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt that gave him mobility and dignity. Titan stood at attention, ears forward, body coiled like a spring waiting for release. The door handle turned. Net resistance from the wedged chair. A pause, then harder pressure. The chair held for 3 seconds before splintering. The door crashed open. Voss entered first, flanked by his 2 orderlies. Behind them, a 4th man Marcus recognized from hospital security footage. Another oversized enforcer in medical scrubs that fooled nobody. No doctors this time. No pretense of medical necessity. This was pure violence with a simple objective: eliminate the threat. Last chance, Reeves, Voss said, pulling out a telescoping baton that extended with a metallic snap. Come quietly, or we make you quiet. Either way, you're getting sedated, and that dog's getting put down. Marcus didn't waste breath on responses. He'd learned decades ago that talking during combat was for movies and fools. Instead, he moved. The IV stand swung in a tight arc, catching the nearest orderly across the temple. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings, skull fractured, out before he hit the floor. Marcus reversed the swing, jabbing the base into the second orderly's solar plexus, driving air from lungs and doubling the man over. Titan, guard. The command released 95 pounds of trained aggression. Titan launched himself at Voss, jaws targeting the security chief's weapon arm. Teeth found flesh through the sleeve, clamped down with 600 pounds of pressure per square inch. Voss screamed, his baton clattering to the floor as the dog bore him backward into the hallway. The 4th man rushed Marcus, confident in his size advantage over a dying 68-year-old. Confidence died when Marcus sidestepped with economy of motion that belonged to someone 40 years younger, grabbed the attacker's extended arm, and used momentum against him. A basic judo throw executed with perfect precision sent 240 pounds of muscle crashing into the hospital bed frame. Something in the man's shoulder separated with an audible pop. The second orderly recovered enough to charge. Marcus met him with the IV stand again, this time targeting the knee. Cartilage crunched. The orderly went down howling, clutching his destroyed joint. In the hallway, Titan maintained his grip on Voss, shaking his head like he was killing a rabbit, tearing tissue and muscle. The security chief beat at the dog's head with his free hand, accomplishing nothing except exhausting himself. Release, Marcus commanded. Titan let go immediately, backing toward Marcus, but maintaining focus on Voss. The security chief clutched his mangled arm, blood seeping between his fingers, his face pale with shock and pain. You're dead, Voss gasped. You're a dead man. You just assaulted hospital staff. Police are already on their way. Good, Marcus replied calmly. They can arrest me right after they arrest you for attempted murder, and Dr. Hargrove, and Dr. Chen, and everyone else involved in killing 23 patients. Footsteps thundered from both ends of the corridor. More security, more orderlies. They'd planned for resistance and had backup ready. Marcus pulled out his phone, held it up so everyone could see it was streaming. This is going live to federal servers. Every person who touches me, every threat, every action, it's all being recorded and transmitted in real time. You want to add more charges? Come ahead. The approaching reinforcements slowed, uncertainty replacing confidence. Live streaming changed calculations. Assault caught on camera meant prison time, not just hospital discipline. Cut that seed, Voss snarled at his remaining conscious subordinate. The orderly with the destroyed knee tried to crawl toward Marcus. Titan moved to intercept, placing himself between threat and handler, a low growl promising more violence if needed. Anyone else? Marcus asked the assembled hospital staff. Anyone else want to try forcing sedation? Murdering a patient? Destroying evidence? Silence. The security personnel exchanged glances. Whatever they'd been paid, it wasn't enough to risk federal prosecution on camera. Cowards, Voss spat. He struggled to his feet, cradling his ruined arm. You're all cowards. He's one old man and a dog. One old man who's a decorated Navy SEAL. A new voice cut through the tension. One old man with federal protection and witness status. One old man you just tried to murder on camera. Agent Jennifer Torres stepped off the elevator, flanked by 4 federal marshals in full tactical gear. She was 39 years old, 5'6" of compressed intensity, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen enough healthcare corruption to fuel a lifetime of righteous anger. She surveyed the carnage in the hallway with professional detachment. Marcus Reeves, I'm Agent Torres, SBI. We spoke on the phone. Are you injured? I'm fine. They're not. Torres looked at the downed orderlies, at Voss bleeding and beaten, at the security staff frozen in the corridor. Bradley Voss, you're under arrest for assault, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other charges I'll think of during booking. Anyone moves, anyone tries to destroy evidence or make phone calls, you join him in custody. The marshals moved with practiced efficiency, securing Voss despite his protests, checking the injured orderlies, establishing control of the corridor. Hospital staff who'd been so confident minutes ago now looked terrified, realizing their world was collapsing in real time. Where's Hargrove? Torres asked Marcus. 4th floor, executive conference room, meeting with his co-conspirators to decide how to handle me. Torres smiled without humor. Perfect. They're all in one place. She keyed her radio. Team 2, execute warrant on 4th floor conference room. Secure all subjects. No one leaves. Through the hospital's ambient noise came distant shouting, sounds of surprise and resistance quickly suppressed. The coordinated raid was happening simultaneously throughout the facility. Sarah appeared from the stairwell, her eyes wide with shock and hope mixed together. Is it over? Are they really arrested? It's over, Torres confirmed. You're Sarah Chen, the nurse who documented everything? Sarah nodded mutely. You saved lives today. Probably dozens of lives these people would have taken if you hadn't been brave enough to collect evidence. Torres gestured to a female marshal. Get her statement. Full protection protocols. She's a critical witness. The marshal guided Sarah away gently. The young nurse looked back at Marcus, tears streaming down her face, mouthing thank you before disappearing into a patient room converted to interview space. Torres approached Marcus, studied him with the assessment of someone trained to read people. You look terrible. When's the last time you slept? 36 hours, give or take. You need medical attention. Real medical attention, not whatever they were doing to you here. I need to see this through first. Make sure they're actually caught. Make sure it sticks. Torres nodded, understanding. Fair enough, but we're transferring you to a federal facility within the hour. Somewhere they can't reach you, can't threaten you, can't finish what they started. She paused. That dog saved your life. Marcus's hand found Titan's head. The dog leaned into the touch, his tail wagging now that the immediate threat had passed. He saved it more times than I can count. He can come with you. Federal facilities. Ties have exceptions for service animals, especially ones that double as bodyguards. Torres pulled out her tablet, swiped through screens. We've got 7 people in custody so far. Hargrove, Chen, Voss, Chief Mercer, 2 orderlies, and a pharmacist who tried to run. Finding more accomplices by the minute. The evidence you and Chen gathered is airtight. Financial records, video footage, patient files. This is going to be the biggest healthcare fraud case Montana's seen in decades. What about the other hospitals? Marcus asked. If they did it here, they might have done it elsewhere. Already on it, we're pulling records from every facility Hargrove's been affiliated with over the past 10 years. If there's a pattern, we'll find it. Torres's expression hardened. These people thought they were untouchable, thought terminal patients were disposable. They're going to learn different in a federal prison. An older woman in a white coat approached tentatively. Dr. Reeves, the physician Sarah had mentioned as being scared but honest. Her face was pale, hands shaking. Agent Torres, I'm Dr. Helena Reeves. I worked here. I need to make a statement. About? About everything I suspected but was too frightened to report. About patients who died too quickly. About medical records I saw being altered. About conversations I overheard that made me sick, but I told myself I must have misunderstood. Tears welled in her eyes. I knew something was wrong. I should have done something sooner. Before Bobby Lawson, before all of them. Torres's voice softened slightly. You're doing something now. That counts. Talk to Marshal Davidson. Tell him everything. Even details that seem minor. It all helps build the case. Dr. Reeves nodded and moved toward the indicated marshal. More hospital staff were emerging now, freed from whatever fear or complicity had kept them silent. Some looked relieved. Others looked sick with guilt. A few looked terrified of their own culpability being discovered. Marcus watched the controlled chaos of a major federal operation unfolding. Marshals securing areas, FBI agents collecting evidence, hospital administrators being led away in handcuffs, the machinery of justice grinding into motion, slow but inexorable. How'd you get here so fast? Marcus asked Torres. You said 3 hours. We were already 90 minutes out when you sent that last message. Lied about the timeline to keep you cautious. She met his eyes. I've lost witnesses before because they got confident too soon. Wasn't losing you. Appreciated. Don't thank me yet. You're going to be giving depositions for weeks, testifying at trials. This case is going to consume the next year of your life. She paused delicately. However long that is. Marcus nodded. The cancer hadn't disappeared because he'd fought off attackers. The timeline hadn't changed because he'd exposed a conspiracy. He was still dying, just doing it on his own terms now. Then we better work fast, he said quietly. Torres smiled grimly. That's the plan. We'll start preliminary interviews tomorrow after you've rested. For tonight, let the doctors check you over. Real doctors this time. Then sleep. You've earned it. A stretcher arrived, staffed by paramedics from outside the hospital. Federal contractors, Torres explained, untainted by any connection to St. Augustine Memorial. They checked Marcus's vitals, examined the strain he'd put on his cancer-ravaged body during the fight, recommended immediate transport to a proper facility. Marcus agreed on one condition. Titan comes with me, not negotiable. Already arranged, Torres assured him. He's listed as medical equipment in the transfer paperwork. Anyone gives you trouble, they answer to me. They loaded Marcus onto the stretcher. Titan jumped up without invitation, settling beside him like he'd done 1,000 times before. The dog's warm weight was comfort and security combined. As they wheeled him toward the elevator, Marcus caught sight of Hargrove being led past in handcuffs. The doctor's expensive suit was rumpled now, his perfect hair disheveled. His cold confidence replaced by dawning horror of what awaited him. Their eyes met for a moment. You should have let me die quietly, Marcus said. Would have been simpler. Hargrove's face twisted with rage and desperation. You're dead anyway. What was the point? What did you accomplish except accelerating your own end? Marcus smiled then, the expression carrying weight of 48 years in service to something larger than himself. The point is Bobby Lawson gets justice. 23 people get justice, and you don't get to murder anyone else. That's enough point for me. They wheeled him past, leaving Hargrove to his reckoning. In the elevator, with Titan, pressed against his side and federal protection surrounding him, Marcus allowed himself to feel the exhaustion he'd been suppressing. Every muscle ached. The cancer gnawed at his insides like acid. His hands shook with adrenaline come down and depleted reserves. But he'd won. Against odds that should have been impossible, he'd exposed evil and stopped it cold. Good boy, he murmured to Titan. Good boy. The dog's tail thumped against the stretcher. Duty completed. Handler protected. Mission accomplished. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold. Stars visible above the parking lot lights. The ambulance waited with open doors. Federal marshals established a secure perimeter. Somewhere in the building behind them, The full scope of the conspiracy was being documented and dismantled piece by piece. Marcus looked up at the hospital as they loaded him into the ambulance. St. Augustine Memorial, House of Healing, turned charnel house. But not anymore. Never again. The doors closed. The ambulance pulled away into the night, carrying a dying veteran and his faithful dog, toward whatever time remained. However much that was, it would be lived with dignity, purpose, and the satisfaction of knowing he'd made his last stand count. The federal medical facility in Missoula was everything St. Augustine Memorial had pretended to be. Clean without feeling sterile, efficient without being cold, staff who treated patients like human beings rather than inventory. Marcus spent 3 days there undergoing evaluation, giving preliminary statements, and recovering from the physical toll of his confrontation with Voss's team. Titan never left his side. The dog had his own bed in the corner of Marcus's private room, food and water provided by staff who understood that service animals were partners, not pets. Nurses checked on Marcus regularly, but respected his space. Doctors consulted rather than dictated. The contrast with his previous hospitalization was stark enough to be disorienting. Agent Torres visited daily, building the case with methodical precision. She'd brought a legal pad and digital recorder, documenting every detail Marcus could remember about his time at St. Augustine. Every suspicion, every threat, every moment that had felt wrong even before he'd known why. We've identified 31 patients over the past 3 years. She told him on the morning of the 4th day. Not just the 23 Sarah Chen documented. Hargrove's been running this operation since he bought into the hospital. Started small, testing whether anyone would notice. When nobody did, he expanded. More patients, more organs, more profit. Marcus sat in the recliner by the window, Titan's head resting on his lap. Outside, the November sun painted the mountains gold and amber. Beautiful country, worth fighting for. Even when the fight was against monsters who wore scrubs instead of uniforms. How much money? Marcus asked. Minimum $7 million over 3 years. Organs sold to black market brokers who supplied desperate patients willing to pay premium prices and not ask questions about sourcing. Torres's voice carried disgust that no amount of professional detachment could fully suppress. They were careful. Targeted isolated patients, people with no advocates. No family to demand investigations. If you and Sarah hadn't connected, they'd still be operating. What's the legal timeline look like? Fast-tracked due to the evidence quality. Federal prosecutors are arguing for immediate trial, no delays. They want to make an example. Torres flipped through her notes. Hargrove's been charged with 31 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, healthcare fraud, organ trafficking, and a dozen other felonies. Chen faces the same. Voss is looking at murder conspiracy, assault, witness intimidation. Chief Mercier's charged with obstruction and corruption. The pharmacist turned state's witness in exchange for reduced sentencing. And Sarah? Sarah Chen is a hero. Full immunity, witness protection if she wants it, and a job offer from the FBI if she's interested in healthcare fraud investigation. Torres smiled slightly. She's considering it, says after everything that happened. She can't go back to regular nursing. Wants to make sure this never happens again. Marcus nodded approval. Sarah had risked everything because it was right, not because it was safe. That kind of courage deserved recognition and opportunity. What about the families? Marcus asked quietly. The people who lost someone and never knew the truth. Torres's expression softened with sympathy. We're notifying them individually, offering counseling services. Legal support if they want to pursue civil suits. It's going to be devastating for most of them. They thought their loved ones died naturally, peacefully. Now they learned they were murdered for profit. The weight of that settled over the room. 31 families about to have grief reopened and complicated by horror and rage. 31 people who died alone and afraid, betrayed by the institution supposed to provide comfort in their final days. Bobby Lawson's funeral is tomorrow, Torres continued. His body was recovered before cremation, so there can be a proper burial. Small service, a few firefighters from his old station. Sarah's planning to attend. Dr. Reeves, too. She paused. You're welcome to come if you're feeling up to it. The prosecutors agreed you could have supervised release for the day. Marcus looked at Titan, then back at Torres. I'll be there. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Marcus dressed in his navy dress blues, the uniform still fitting despite his weight loss. The ribbons and medals representing 40 years of service arranged with precision on his chest. Looking in the mirror, he saw the ghost of the young SEAL who'd earned those decorations staring back, aged and dying, but still standing. Titan wore his service vest, the patches identifying him as a military working dog and medical alert animal. Together they made an impression that turned heads as they walked through the facility to the waiting federal vehicle. The cemetery occupied a hillside overlooking Ashford, the same mountains Marcus had watched from his hospital window, now serving as backdrop for Bobby Lawson's final resting place. A modest gathering of people stood around a simple casket, their breath fogging in the November air. Marcus recognized Sarah immediately. She wore black. Her daughter Emma holding her hand. The 7-year-old had her mother's eyes and a solemnity that suggested she understood more than children should have to. Dr. Helena Reeves stood nearby, still looking haunted by guilt she couldn't erase. A handful of firefighters in dress uniforms, honoring their fallen brother. Agent Torres maintaining discreet distance, but clearly present as both investigator and mourner. The service was brief. A chaplain spoke about sacrifice and service, about Bobby's years protecting his community, about his courage facing illness without complaint. No mention of how he'd really died. That truth was still too raw, too criminal for a graveside eulogy. When the chaplain finished, one of the firefighters stepped forward. Late 50s, gray beard, eyes red from crying. "Bobby was the best of us," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Ran into burning buildings when everyone else ran out. Saved 17 lives during his career. 17 people walking around today because Bobby didn't hesitate. He paused, struggling for composure. He deserved better than what happened. Deserved to die with dignity, surrounded by people who loved him. Not alone. Not like that. Sarah stepped forward then, Emma still clutching her hand. "Mr. Lawson was kind to me," she said quietly. "Always thanked me even. And when he was hurting, always asked about my daughter. He was a good man who got dealt a bad hand." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop what happened. I'm sorry I was too scared to act sooner." "You acted when it mattered," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "You gave him justice. You made sure his death counted for something." All eyes turned to Marcus. The firefighters recognized his uniform, his rank, the ribbons that told stories of valor and sacrifice. They snapped to attention instinctively, a show of respect between warriors. Marcus moved to the casket, placed his hand on the polished wood. "I didn't know Bobby Lawson. Never met him alive. But I heard him through a wall during his last night. Heard him thank the nurses even while he was dying." He looked at the assembled mourners. The people who killed him thought he was disposable. Thought terminal patients were inventory to be processed for profit. They were wrong. Bobby mattered. Every person they murdered mattered. And because of what Bobby's death revealed, dozens more will live. That's his legacy. That's what his final sacrifice accomplished. The chaplain offered a closing prayer. The firefighters saluted as the casket was lowered into the ground. One by one, mourners dropped flowers into the grave. Final offerings to a man who deserved so much better than what he'd received. Sarah approached Marcus as people began dispersing. Emma stayed close to her mother, watching Titan with fascination mixed with shyness. "Thank you for coming. Bobby would have appreciated it." "It was important to be here," Marcus replied, "to witness, to remember." Emma tugged her mother's sleeve, whispered something. Sarah smiled through her tears. "She wants to know if she can pet your dog." Marcus looked down at the girl. "His name is Titan. He's very gentle with children. You can pet him if you're careful." Emma approached slowly, extending her hand for Titan to sniff. The dog's tail wagged gently. He lowered his head, allowing the girl to stroke his fur. She giggled softly, the sound incongruous in the cemetery, but welcome, a reminder that life continued despite death and darkness. "He's soft," Emma said. "Does he protect you?" "Yes. He keeps me safe." "Like a superhero," Marcus smiled. "Exactly like a superhero." Dr. Reeves joined them, her medical bag slung over her shoulder even at a funeral. The habit of decades impossible to break. "Mr. Reeves, how are you feeling? Any pain? Complications from your altercation?" "Tired, but managing." She studied him with professional assessment, seeing what he wasn't saying. You should be resting. The stress you've been under, the physical exertion during the confrontation, it's accelerating your condition. I know. But you came anyway. I came anyway. Understanding passed between them. Some things mattered more than comfort, more than extending a life already measured in months. Bearing witness mattered. Honoring the dead mattered. Standing against evil, even when standing was painful, mattered. Agent Torres approached, her phone in hand. Marcus, we need to get you back to the facility. Your doctors are concerned about exposure and exhaustion. Marcus nodded. He turned back to Sarah and Emma. Take care of each other. And if the FBI offer interests you, take it. You've got instincts and courage they need. Sarah hugged him impulsively, quickly, then stepped back looking embarrassed. You saved my life. Saved my daughter's future. I'll never forget that. You saved your own life. I just helped with the heavy lifting. They walked back to the federal vehicle, Titan padding beside Marcus with patient loyalty. The cemetery fell away behind them. Bobby Lawson laid to rest with the honor he deserved, surrounded by people who'd made sure his death wasn't meaningless. Back at the medical facility, exhaustion hit Marcus like a physical force. The doctors had been right. The exertion and stress were taking their toll, accelerating the cancer's progression, buying his enemies the victory they'd wanted, even if they'd lost the war. He lay in bed that evening, Titan curled at his feet, thinking about the past week, about Bobby Lawson dying alone, about Sarah Chen risking everything, about the fight that had nearly killed him, but had exposed a conspiracy that would have claimed dozens more victims. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Torres. Preliminary hearing set for next week. Prosecutors expect guilty pleas from everyone except Hargrove. He's going to trial. They want you to testify. Will you be strong enough? Marcus looked at Titan. At the IV in his arm, feeding him medications that bought time but couldn't buy cure. At the mountains outside his window, standing eternal while he faded. He typed back, I'll be strong enough, whatever it takes. Because that's what warriors did. They stood when standing was hard. They fought when fighting was painful. They bore witness when silence was easier. Bobby Lawson had died alone in room 306, murdered by people who'd taken oaths to heal. But his death had sparked a chain of events that brought down a criminal empire and saved countless lives. That mattered. That counted. That was justice. Marcus closed his eyes, Titan's rhythmic breathing a comfort in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more statements, more evidence, more preparation for trials that would determine whether the guilty faced consequences or escaped through legal maneuvering. But tonight, Bobby Lawson rested in peace, surrounded by Montana mountains and honored by people who knew his worth. Tonight, that was enough. The trial began on a morning when early winter had finally claimed Montana completely. Snow covered Missoula in silence. The courthouse steps cleared, but the surrounding trees heavy with white. Marcus arrived in a wheelchair, his strength depleted by the cancer's relentless advance. But his dress blues were immaculate, and his back was straight despite the pain. Titan walked beside the chair, his service vest freshly brushed, his demeanor calm but alert. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the gallery, their cameras capturing every moment of what had become the biggest healthcare fraud case in the state's history. Families of victims. CITAMs occupied the front rows, their faces showing mixtures of grief and rage and desperate hope for justice. Sarah Chen sat with Emma, the girl clutching a stuffed animal and watching everything with wide eyes. Dr. Victor Hargrove sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than most people earned in months. His lawyer beside him, radiating expensive competence. The doctor's face was composed, confident, showing none of the fear he should have felt. He pled not guilty to all charges, claimed he was being scapegoated for systemic failures, insisted he'd tried to provide the best care possible under difficult circumstances. The other defendants had already accepted plea bargains. Dr. Chen received 25 years in exchange for testimony. Voss got 30 years for murder conspiracy and assault. Chief Mercer faced 15 years for corruption. The pharmacist received 10 years for cooperation. But Hargrove refused to concede guilt, refused to accept that what he'd done was murder rather than mercy. The prosecutor was a woman named Catherine Walsh, 47 years old, with the focused intensity of someone who took healthcare crimes personally. Her opening statement was precise and devastating, laying out the conspiracy in detail that made the jury's faces harden with disgust. Over 3 years, Dr. Victor Hargrove systematically murdered 31 terminal patients, she told the jury. Not because they were suffering, not because they requested euthanasia, but because their organs were valuable and their deaths were profitable. He selected victims carefully, isolated patients with no advocates. People like Robert Lawson, a 52-year-old firefighter who'd spent his life saving others, only to be killed by the doctor sworn to heal him. She presented evidence methodically, financial records showing $7 million flowing to offshore accounts, medical records documenting falsified death certificates, video footage of Bobby Lawson's murder, the jury watching in horrified silence as the former firefighter convulsed and died, while Voss and Chen watched without attempting resuscitation. When Walsh called Marcus to testify, 2 marshals helped him from the wheelchair to the witness stand. Titan lay at his feet, as still as a statue, but his eyes never left Marcus's face, monitoring for any sign of distress. Walsh approached with respect evident in her posture. "Mr. Reeves, please state your name and background for the record." Marcus Reeves, retired Navy SEAL, 40 years of service, currently terminal with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. His voice was steady despite the weakness ravaging his body. "Why did you check into St. Augustine Memorial Hospital?" "Pain management. I was told they specialized in palliative care for terminal patients." "And what did you discover during your stay?" Marcus recounted everything. Bobby Lawson's sudden disappearance, the stripped room, Sarah Chen's frightened warnings, the evidence of systematic murder, his confrontation with Hargrove, Chen, and Voss, the attempted assault that ended with federal intervention. The jury listened with rapt attention. Several wiped tears when Marcus described hearing Bobby thank nurses even as he was dying. Anger flashed across their faces when Marcus detailed Hargrove's threats and attempted forced sedation. The defense attorney, a man named Rollins, who specialized in medical malpractice defense, approached for cross-examination with calculated skepticism. "Mr. Reeves, you're on significant pain medication, correct?" "Correct." "Medications that can cause confusion, paranoia, even hallucinations." "I'm on morphine as needed. I use it sparingly to maintain mental clarity." "But you're a dying man, facing your own mortality. Isn't it possible your perceptions were colored by fear? That you misinterpreted normal medical procedures as something sinister?" Marcus met the lawyer's eyes with the flat calm of a man who'd faced far more intimidating opponents. "I watched video footage of Bobby Lawson being murdered. Watched Dr. Hargrove. Chen inject him with a fatal dose while Voss prevented him from calling for help. That's not misinterpretation. That's documented fact. You claim to have heard Mr. Lawson through the wall the night he died, but medical records show he was heavily sedated, likely unconscious. Medical records were falsified. Sarah Chen documented the alterations. That's also documented fact." Rollins tried different angles, suggesting Marcus was a glory seeker, a troubled veteran looking for one last mission, someone whose military training made him see threats where none existed. But Marcus's testimony remained consistent, unshakable, supported by evidence that couldn't be disputed. When the defense finally dismissed him, Marcus returned to his wheelchair exhausted but satisfied. He'd done what needed doing. Sarah Chen testified next, her voice shaking but determined. She walked the jury through her documentation process, explained how she'd noticed patterns of suspicious deaths, detailed the threats she'd received to stay silent. Emma watched from the gallery, her small face proud of her mother's courage. "I knew if I spoke up, I'd lose my job," Sarah said quietly. "Possibly lose custody of my daughter if they made good on their threats. But I couldn't keep watching people die, couldn't keep being complicit through silence." Dr. Helena Reeves testified about her suspicions, her guilt over not acting sooner, her relief when the conspiracy was finally exposed. "I told myself I must be wrong," she said, tears streaming. "That I was seeing patterns where none existed, that respected doctors couldn't possibly be murdering patients. I was a coward, and people died because of my cowardice." Agent Torres presented the financial evidence, traced the money from organ sales to Hargrove's accounts. demonstrated the clear connection between patient deaths and profit. This wasn't medicine, she told the jury. This was murder for hire, with the doctor acting as both killer and salesman. The defense called character witnesses who testified about Hargrove's stellar reputation, his decades of dedicated service, his contributions to medical research. But their testimonials rang hollow against the mountain of evidence showing systematic killing. Hargrove himself took the stand against his lawyer's advice, confident he could convince the jury of his innocence. It was a fatal miscalculation. Under Walsh's cross-examination, his practiced sympathy cracked. These were terminal patients, he said, his frustration showing. Already dying, already suffering. I provided release from pain. That's mercy, not murder. Did they consent to this mercy? Walsh asked. They were too compromised to make rational decisions. So you decided for them, decided when they'd lived long enough, decided their organs were worth more than their remaining time. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, doctor? Explain to this jury how killing 31 people for profit constitutes medical care. Hargrove's composure shattered. You don't understand the pressures, the financial realities. Hospitals can't survive on Medicare reimbursements alone. We needed revenue streams. These patients were going to die anyway. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, demanding order. But the damage was done. Hargrove had confessed in all but explicit terms, revealed the cold calculation behind his crimes, demonstrated that he viewed human lives as financial assets to be liquidated. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty, 31 times guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of healthcare fraud, guilty of organ trafficking, guilty of every charge filed against him. The families wept. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, whispering that justice had been served. Dr. Reeves covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Agent Torres allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Hargrove's face went pale as the verdicts were read. The reality of spending the rest of his life in federal prison finally penetrated his arrogance. His lawyer requested bail pending sentencing. The judge denied it immediately. Dr. Hargrove, you violated the most sacred trust in medicine, the judge said, her voice cold with contempt. Patients came to you vulnerable and dying, and you murdered them for profit. There is no bail for someone who committed such calculated evil. You'll remain in custody until sentencing, at which point I intend to ensure you never breathe free air again. Marshals led Hargrove away in handcuffs. He looked back at the gallery, his eyes finding Marcus. Whatever he saw in the old SEAL's face made him look away quickly, his remaining confidence evaporating like morning frost. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Walsh gave a brief statement praising the courage of witnesses, particularly Sarah Chen and Marcus Reeves. This case demonstrates that one person's refusal to stay silent can bring down an entire criminal enterprise. Bobby Lawson's death was not in vain. Because of him, because of the people who fought for justice in his name, countless future victims were saved. Sarah stood beside Walsh, Emma holding her hand. I want people to know that healthcare workers see things. We know when something's wrong. And we have a duty to speak up, even when it's terrifying, especially when it's terrifying. Marcus declined to speak to the media. He was too exhausted, too depleted by the day's exertion. But as the wheelchair-accessible van transported him back to the medical facility, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the false peace of denial or drugs, but genuine peace that came from knowing he'd completed his mission. Titan sensed it too. The dog's tail wagged steadily, his eyes bright with satisfaction that transcended animal instinct. They'd fought together one last time. They'd won together. Whatever came next, they'd face it having made their final stand count. Back at the facility, doctors checked Marcus's vitals and looked concerned. The trial had accelerated his decline. The cancer was winning its war, advancing faster now that Marcus had expended his reserves fighting a different battle. How long? Marcus asked the oncologist. A young woman with kind eyes. Days, maybe a week. I'm sorry. Marcus nodded acceptance. He'd known, had felt death approaching like an old acquaintance finally arriving for a long-delayed meeting. Can I stay here? With Titan? Of course. We'll make you comfortable, whatever you need. That evening, Agent Torres visited with news. Hargrove's sentencing is in 2 weeks. Life without parole on all counts. Sentences to run consecutively. He'll die in prison. She paused. You won't be here for it. I know. But you did this. You and Sarah. You stopped a monster. Torres's professional mask slipped, showing genuine emotion underneath. My brother died from medical malpractice. Wrong medication, incompetent doctor, covered up by the hospital. I've spent 15 years fighting healthcare corruption because of him. This case, this victory, it's for him, and for Bobby, and for all 31 victims. Justice, Marcus said quietly. Justice, Torres agreed. Finally. After she left, Marcus lay in the dimming light, Titan pressed against the bed, the dog's warmth a comfort as the cold approached. Through his window, snow fell softly over Missoula, covering the world in peaceful white. He thought about Bobby Lawson, about their brief connection through a wall, about how one man's death had sparked a chain of events that brought down an empire of evil. He thought about Sarah Chen finding courage she didn't know she possessed, about Dr. Reeves learning that guilt could be transformed into action, about Agent Torres serving justice for a brother she'd lost. Mostly, he thought about purpose, about how even dying men could make a difference if they refused to surrender to despair, about how 40 years in service had prepared him for this final mission, this last stand against darkness. His hand found Titan's head. Good boy, he whispered. Good boy. We did it. Titan's tail thumped against the mattress. Agreement, satisfaction, peace. Outside, the snow continued falling, and the mountains stood eternal. And somewhere in the world, people slept safely because a dying veteran and his faithful dog had refused to let evil triumph. That was enough. That was everything. 3 months after. The verdict. Spring arrived in Montana with the tentative hope of all new beginnings. The snow melted from the valleys, revealing ground that had been frozen and dead, but now showed the first green shoots of renewal. The mountains remained capped with white, eternal sentinels watching over a landscape transforming from winter's grip. Marcus Reeves did not live to see the spring. He died 6 days after the trial, with Titan pressed against his side and Sarah Chen holding his hand. His passing was peaceful, painless, everything that Bobby Lawson's death had not been. The morphine he'd resisted for so long finally became his friend, easing him out of a world he'd served faithfully for 68 years. His funeral drew hundreds, fellow SEALs from across the country, veterans from 3 different wars, FBI agents who'd worked the case, families of the 31 victims who credited him with delivering justice for their loved ones. Sarah and Emma, dressed in black, Emma carrying flowers she'd picked herself. Agent Torres in full dress uniform, her face composed but her eyes red. Titan attended his handler's funeral, lying on the casket during the service, refusing to be moved, his amber eyes watching as they lowered Marcus into Montana ground with full military honors. The 21-gun salute echoed off the mountains. Taps played while grown warriors wept openly. The flag was folded with precision and presented to the SEAL team that had arranged everything, Marcus having no living family to receive it. After the service, after the crowds dispersed and the cemetery workers began filling the grave, Titan remained. He lay on the fresh earth, head on his paws, keeping vigil as he'd kept vigil for 9 years through combat and cancer and one final fight against evil. Sarah approached carefully, Emma beside her. Titan, she said softly. Come on, boy. Time to go. The dog didn't move. His eyes tracked her, but his body remained fixed, loyal beyond death, refusing to abandon his post. He's waiting, Emma said, with the clarity children sometimes possess, waiting for Mr. Reeves to come back. Agent Torres joined them, her voice gentle. Dogs don't understand permanent death the way we do. He thinks Marcus is just delayed, that he'll return if Titan waits long enough. What happens to him now? Sarah asked. Marcus made arrangements, left instructions. Torres pulled out a document from her bag. He wanted Titan to go to a good home, someone who'd understand what he is, what he's been through, someone who'd honor his service. She looked at Sarah. He requested you, if you were willing. Said you'd earn Titan's loyalty by standing up when it mattered. Sarah's eyes widened. Me? I don't know anything about military dogs. You know about courage, about doing what's right even when it's terrifying. That's what Marcus valued most. Torres held out a leash. Titan's 9 years old, probably has a few good years left if his health holds. He deserves to spend them with someone who understands sacrifice. Emma knelt beside Titan, her small hand stroking his head. Please, Mommy, he protected Mr. Reeves. He could protect us too. Sarah looked at the dog, at her daughter, at the grave holding a man who'd saved their lives at the cost of his own remaining time. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Titan comes home with us. It took 2 hours before the dog finally rose from his vigil. Even then, he looked back repeatedly at Marcus's grave, as if hoping his handler would emerge and tell him this was just another mission. Just another deployment before coming home. But some deployments had no return. Some missions ended in ground and silence and memory. Sarah took Titan home to the small apartment she shared with Emma, the space modest but filled with warmth Marcus's cabin had lacked. The dog explored cautiously, nose tracking unfamiliar scents, ears alert for threats that no longer existed. He settled eventually in the corner of the living room, with sightlines to all entrances. Old training persisting even in safety, Emma became his devoted companion. She'd read to him after school, her child's voice stumbling through picture books while Titan listened with patient attention. She'd share her snacks, brush his coat, tell him about her day with the assumption that he understood every word. Maybe he did. Working dogs learned to read humans with precision that transcended language. Sarah accepted the FBI's job offer, joining the healthcare fraud division as an investigator specializing in patient advocacy. Her first-hand experience with St. Augustine Memorial made her invaluable in identifying institutional red flags and supporting witnesses too frightened to come forward alone. She traveled frequently, Emma staying with Sarah's parents, but Titan always came along. His presence calmed nervous witnesses. His service dog status granted access to facilities that would have turned away regular investigators. 6 months after Marcus's death, Sarah returned to Ashford for the first time. The town had changed. St. Augustine Memorial Hospital had been shut down pending investigation of its entire history, the building standing empty like a monument to institutional evil. Several board members faced criminal charges. The nursing staff had scattered to other facilities, some cleared of wrongdoing, others under investigation for complicity. Sarah visited Bobby Lawson's grave, now properly maintained with flowers that local firefighters left weekly. She knelt beside the headstone, Titan sitting at attention beside her. "We got them, Bobby," she said quietly. "All of them. Hargrove got life without parole. Chen's in federal prison. Voss, too. Everyone who hurt you faced justice." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry it took your death to make me brave enough to act, but I promise I'm making it count. Every case I work, every victim I help, it's honoring you and the others." Titan nuzzled her hand, offering comfort with instincts that ran deeper than training. They visited Marcus's grave next, the headstone simple but proud. Marcus Reeves, Navy SEAL, 1956 to 2024. He stood when others could not. Sarah placed flowers, then stepped back to let Titan approach alone. The dog sniffed the stone, whined softly, then lay down with his head on his paws, the same position he'd held at the funeral, maintaining vigil for a handler who wouldn't return. After several minutes, he rose and returned to Sarah, something in his posture suggesting acceptance if not understanding. "He was special," Sarah told the grave. "Changed everything by refusing to stay silent. Emma talks about him constantly, calls him her guardian angel." She smiled through tears. "Thank you for trusting me with Titan, for trusting me with your evidence, for believing I could be brave when I didn't believe it myself." The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying mountain cold and the promise of weather changing. Spring was yielding to summer now, the cycle continuing regardless of individual lives beginning or ending. Agent Torres had mentioned that Marcus's story was being written up for training materials, teaching new investigators about the importance of witness protection and the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary evil. His tactics during the confrontation with Voss were being studied by protective services details. His interrogation resistance when Hargrove tried to force sedation had become a case study in maintaining composure under pressure. But more than tactical lessons, Marcus had left something harder to quantify. He'd shown that dying didn't mean defeated, that one person could make a difference even when that person was counted out and written off, that courage existed in hospital rooms and nursing stations just as surely as it existed on battlefields. Sarah returned to her car, where Emma waited with Sarah's mother. The girl brightened when she saw Titan. "Did you tell Mr. Reeves thank you?" "I did. Do you think he heard?" Sarah looked back at the grave, at the mountains beyond, at the sky so vast it seemed to hold every possibility and promise. "Yes, sweetheart. I think he heard." They drove away from Ashford as afternoon faded toward evening. In the rearview mirror, Sarah watched the cemetery disappear. 2 graves holding men who'd deserved better than what they'd received, but who'd found justice through connection and courage, and refusal to surrender to darkness. That night, in their apartment in Missoula, Emma fell asleep, curled against Titan on the dog's bed. Sarah found them there, girl and dog both peaceful, both safe, both protected by the choices Marcus Reeves had made in his final days. She covered Emma with a blanket, let Titan stay where he was, then sat at her computer to write reports on her current case. Another hospital showing suspicious patterns, another vulnerable population at risk, another fight waiting to be fought. Some battles ended, others continued. The war against institutional evil, against people who viewed the vulnerable as inventory, against corruption hiding behind professional credentials and polite language, that war never really stopped. But every victory mattered. Every exposed conspiracy saved lives. Every person who chose courage over comfort made the world incrementally better. Marcus had understood that, had spent 40 years in service to that principle, had made his final stand count even as cancer killed him from within. Sarah opened a new document, began typing her preliminary findings, knowing that somewhere down the line, her work might save someone, might stop another Bobby Lawson from dying alone and afraid, might give another frightened nurse the courage to speak up before silence became complicity. Titan's soft snoring provided background comfort. Emma's rhythmic breathing added peaceful harmony. Outside, Missoula settled into night, lights appearing in windows like stars brought to earth. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments what moment affected you most deeply. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that one person can make a difference, that courage exists in ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, that standing up against evil matters even when the cost is high. Because somewhere out there, another vulnerable person needs an advocate, another conspiracy needs exposing, another institution needs someone brave enough to say the truth, even when speaking is dangerous. Marcus Reeves answered that call in his final days. Sarah Chen found courage she didn't know she possessed. Bobby Lawson's death became a catalyst for justice instead of another forgotten tragedy. Their story reminds us that heroes aren't always young or healthy or powerful. Sometimes heroes are dying veterans who refuse to go quietly. Sometimes heroes are single mothers drowning in debt but holding on to integrity. Sometimes heroes are former firefighters who thank their nurses even while being murdered. Sometimes being a hero simply means standing up when others cannot, speaking truth when silence is safer, fighting battles that need fighting even when victory seems impossible. May we all find that courage when our moment comes. May we all stand when standing matters most. May we all remember that the most important battles aren't always fought with weapons, but with witness, with evidence, with refusal to let evil triumph through our silence. God bless those who stand against darkness. God bless the vulnerable who survive because someone chose to protect them. God bless the memory of Marcus Reeves and all who serve something larger than themselves. Rest in peace, warrior. Your mission is complete. Your legacy lives on in every life you saved, every person inspired by your courage, every case solved because you refused to die quietly. Titan sleeps peacefully now, protecting a new family, his service continuing even as his handler rests. The bond between warrior and dog transcends death, proving that loyalty and love endure beyond any ending. That's the power of standing up. That's the meaning of service. That's what happens when dying veterans refuse to be victims. When frightened nurses choose courage, when justice finally arrives for those who deserved it most. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for remembering that every person matters, every life has value, and evil only wins when good people stay silent. Subscribe, share, and stand up when your moment comes. Because somewhere, someone is waiting for a hero. And that hero might just be you.